Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're covering a character that has incredible upfront burst damage, excellent sustained damage in longer fights, and access to the most powerful control combo in the game, as well as also bringing almost all of the utility that your party needs in terms of spell access and skill access, so it's really a true all-in-one character. That makes it perfect for a main character or origin run, or just to add to any party that needs damage, control, skills, or utility, which of course is every party, making this character a very widely applicable addition to any honor mode run. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Josh Hobbs for the $10 donation, Wascal Wabbitable for the $25, Aesthetic Leviathan for the $20, and Thomas Beam for the $10, as well as Nicholas Motto for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means a lot, especially in January, because you may not know this, but YouTube revenues plummet in January, so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's get to the build. I'm using Astarion as the example character here because this is a physical damage build that revolves around doing as many attacks per turn as possible. Astarion is typically the best companion to use for these builds, because his bonus hit chance that he gets in the early game and his late game story events that increase his damage per attack are excellent for builds that revolve around doing lots of attacks. Hitting your attacks more often and having them do more damage is the whole point of this build, and Astarion gets to do both. If you're building this as a custom character, the best race by far, in my opinion, is half Wood Elf. The bonus movement speed that you get from Wood Elf or half Wood Elf is extremely useful, but this character also does not inherently get shield proficiency until later on in the build. And for archery builds, which this is one, having shield proficiency in the early game can be incredibly useful. Even if you have your bows out and active, you can still benefit from the armor class increase of a shield held in your melee slot. So you just have 2 armor class additionally compared to a character without shield proficiency, which is especially important in the early game when this character's damage combos obviously are not yet online because you're low level. And so enemies may still occasionally attack you. Having higher armor class can really help out in the early game. Other than half Wood Elf, good options include Dwergar, because starting every combat by surprise and invisibility and invisible is of course incredibly powerful all the way through the game. And Halfling, because rerolling 1s is extremely potent for this character as well, making you much more consistent both at your damage and your dialogue, as well as your defensive saving throws. At first level, we're going to be starting in Bard. This character is getting a lot of its damage and a lot of its utility from Bard levels. We want to level them up to provide both as quickly as possible, and also to access our higher power level extra attack and control spells features that Bard gives us. Though we'll be multiclassing heavily, starting with Bard just gets the character off to a much smoother start. For our cantrip selection on Bard, we're going to be taking Friends, because this is going to be a party face, so the character will want Friends to be better at dialogue checks. And Minor Illusion. Minor Illusion is basically critical for every party to have because it lets you lure enemies off on their own or group them together before combat, meaning that you can apply AoE spell effects to them better or fight them one at a time without their allies knowing, so Minor Illusion just very, very useful for every party to have access to. For our spell selection at this level, we're taking Healing Word as a bonus action. This can be used to get an ally up from the ground very easily, so it's a great emergency panic button. And Dissonant Whispers, these are our 2 main combat spells. Dissonant Whispers for an archery build is especially good because frightening enemies means that they can't move. And an enemy who's a melee attacker and you're a ranged attacker, if they can't move, obviously they're just food. So Dissonant Whispers is one of the best control spells for this character. It's not concentration, so it doesn't interfere with any of your other spells, and does great damage in the early game. Later on, we won't be focusing as much on aggressive spells, though we will continue to pick up a couple because of item combinations that we get later. Most of our damage will be coming from our hand crossbows, but in the early game, this spellcasting gives us a whole extra layer of extremely high power that makes the character even better. We're also going to take Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This is a great control spell to have in the early game. And for our last spell, we're going to pick up Long Strider. If you already have this elsewhere in the party, then you can grab another spell, a utility spell like Disguise Self, for example. But again, every party should have access to Long Strider, and especially for a ranged character because the ability to move faster than your melee enemies will keep you out of danger. Of course, you need to make sure you select the right starting instrument or you're going to ruin the entire playthrough, so don't get this one wrong. And then for our ability score selection, we actually have two choices as to what abilities we're going to take here, and that's going to depend on whether you prefer to use the Graceful Cloth or Ethel's Hair to hit 20 dexterity. Either way, we're going to need some kind of item to hit 20 dexterity, because this build has other feats that it wants to use. In general, I recommend the Graceful Cloth for this character, because it's already really powerful to have it on this character anyways, but what ability score selection we start with is going to depend on which of those we're going to use. So for the Graceful Cloth build that I'll be demoing here, we're going to take 16 dexterity. Let me do this like this. 16 charisma in order to make our bard spells and dialogue skills better, 14 constitution, and 12 wisdom. That gives us a decent amount of hit points, solid saving throws, and makes our two offensive abilities as high as possible. If you're using Ethel's Hair, then you just drop wisdom down to 10 and bump dexterity up to 17 in order to hit 20 dexterity with only a single ability score improvement. For our skill selections for this character, the goal is to have the character be able to do everything, so obviously, you're going to want Persuasion, and I highly recommend having Sleight of Hand as a dexterity-based character with skill expertise. This character will make the ideal lockpicking character for you as well. What other skills you take is going to depend a little bit. Obviously, you can just max out on the dialogue skills to be able to have all of them. You can also pick up Insight or some of these knowledge skills if you want to roll those specifically. You can grab Stealth if you know you're going to be doing more stealth archery-focused things. What I would recommend for the optimal spread in order to make the character as mechanically strong as possible is to take Sleight of Hand, Stealth, Persuasion and Deception, and then Perception, which Astarion gets from his race. And then you can put the last point that we have here in Intimidation just anywhere for flavor. You can use either the Urchin or Guild Artisan background to get Persuasion, to get Sleight of Hand and Stealth from Urchin, or Persuasion and Insight from Guild Artisan. Those backgrounds will give you the right skill mix to make this character work very well as a party face. But basically the goal here is to get Sleight of Hand, Stealth, and Persuasion, because those are the three most important skills for this character in order to fulfill all of the roles that you want it to fill. Alright, that's it for level 1. Let's move on to level 2. Character level 2, we're taking our second level of Bard, which gets a Song of Rest, which of course will let us use our bardic abilities more frequently, and as we continue to level up, that's going to be very important. And Jack of all Trades makes us even better at covering every possible skill that we could need for the party, because it just gives us half our proficiency bonus to every other ability check that we haven't taken a proficiency in. That makes this character reasonable at rolling like knowledge checks, for example, like religion or history that sometimes come up during dialogue. You can sometimes succeed on those rolls, even without investing anything into it, not proficiency or intelligence. So this character has a better time with those types of dialogues than a lot of other characters. For our spell selection at this level, we've already got most of the important spells, so you can grab a flavor or utility spell like Disguise Self or Speak with Animals. For the most optimal combat selection, I would grab Thunder Wave. You can use that to push enemies away from you, which of course is very useful to an archer who doesn't want enemies to be next to them. At character level 3, we're going to be choosing our Bard subclass, and of course for an archery build, the choice is clear. We're going to be taking the College of Swords. Sword Bard gets Slashing Flourish, which allows you to turn one attack into 2 attacks and also add damage to it. Slashing Flourish may be the single most powerful ability in Baldur's Gate 3. Turning one attack into 2 attacks is incredibly strong, and doing so at 3rd level, where we get to make 3 attacks per round of combat at this level, is ridiculous. We can make 2 attacks with our main hand with the Slashing Flourish, and then 1 additional attack with our offhand, because we're using 2-hand crossbows. So that gives us more attacks than any other character in the game at this point, all of which are hitting for full damage. So our upfront damage at this point in the game is ridiculous. Not to mention that we're still a full spellcaster and have all of the spellcasting power available to a 3rd level character at this point as well. For our fighting style for Sword Bard here, we are going to be taking 2-weapon fighting. This does work for the offhand hand crossbow, and lets us add our dexterity to the damage with that weapon as well, so now we're doing full damage with both main hand attacks and offhand attacks. One disadvantage of this build is that we don't get the archery fighting style, which is very, very good. So a possible variation could include a level of fighter in order to get the archery fighting style at this point, but you'll see why we don't do that as the build continues to come together. But the 2-weapon fighting style increases our damage output dramatically as well. For our spell selection at this point, we have level 2 spells that we can pick up. I'm going to recommend taking Cloud of Daggers. This has no saving throw and just does damage, and is just an incredible AoE spell. Great thing to be concentrating on in any fight. You can also replace, at this point, your least used spell. You could drop something like Thunder Wave. For another level 2 spell, you could take a utility spell like Invisibility or Enhanceability, or a more combat-oriented spell like Hold Person. Hold Person is very good for this character also, because you can Hold Person someone and then immediately get a guaranteed critical hit against them with your bonus action hand crossbow. So you get the control effect of Hold Person and the damage effect of Hold Person all at once. We're also going to definitely want to know this spell later on, so we can just go ahead and replace Thunder Wave with Hold Person right now. That's all the decisions we have to make at level 3, but we've gotten an incredible power boost, which only gets better when we get to level 4. At character level 4, we're taking our 4th level of Bard, and that gets us another feat. Or our first feat, excuse me. For this feat, we are going to be taking Sharpshooter. Yes, even without archery fighting style, Sharpshooter is still just so good for archery builds, especially hand crossbow builds, because this adds 10 extra damage to all of our attacks. Remember, we're making 3 attacks per round at this point, so that's 30 extra damage per turn that we get from using this feat. If an enemy has a very low chance of you hitting them or is at low health, you can toggle off Sharpshooter in order to have a higher chance of hitting them. Most of the time, you will do more average damage leaving Sharpshooter on, because increasing the damage of your hits is really important. And don't be afraid of the low hit chance that Sharpshooter will sometimes show for this character, because remember, you're just making more attacks than any other character, so you have more chances at hitting your attacks, even if the individual hit chance might be lower. Of course, you can also mitigate this using spells like Bless to boost your hit chance, using High Ground, using Stealth for advantage. There's lots of ways to play around Sharpshooter, but even in like the worst case scenario, this increases your damage considerably, and in the best case scenario, it increases your damage by a truly ridiculous amount. For our cantrip selection at this level, we're going to grab Blade Ward here, because sometimes this character might be isolated or surrounded by enemies. You just need to buy them a turn in order for enemies not to manage to kill you. So having Blade Ward can be useful as a panic button in serious emergencies. Not something that you're going to cast that regularly, but is useful. You can also just take a utility spell like Light or Mage Hand if you prefer. For our spell selection at this level, again, we're grabbing a utility spell. Enhanceability can help with this character's utility for the party overall. You can also take Invisibility to make sure that you can always start fights from good areas. Heat Metal's a great combat spell. I'm just going to grab Enhanceability because it's really nice to be able to have this for really, really important dialogue checks. At level 5... we're taking our 5th level of Bard, and that gets us Font of Inspiration, an incredibly important Bard ability, and one reason why we just rush down our Bard levels as early as possible. Now we get all our Bardic Inspiration dice back after a short rest, which, remember, we get more of because we have Song of Rest as a Bard, so we can use our extra attacks many, many more times per day. This gives us a ton of additional burst damage potential for more fights, and sustained damage potential for longer fights. We also increase the damage, the damage that we gain and the inspiration die size if we use inspiration for other stuff to a d8, so level 5 is a pretty big power spike. Then we also get 3rd level spell access, so we're going to grab Hypnotic Pattern here. This is going to be extremely important for later on with the combos that we can use with items, but also just gives us a great control option at this point. You can also then replace a spell with another spell. At this point, you probably, for damaging options, are mostly going to be focusing on things other than Cloud of Daggers. So your concentration is going to be spent on Hold Person or Hypnotic Pattern, so you can drop Cloud of Daggers. You could also drop Tasha's if you aren't using it. I'm going to recommend dropping Tasha's here, and we're going to pick up Glyph of Warding just as a great combat spell. At this point, this doesn't take concentration, leaves a big ice surface on the ground if you use the cold damage, is a great control spell, just an excellent utility spell overall to have, always useful in every situation. Then, at level 6, we're taking our 6th and final level of Bard, because at character level 6, Sword Bard gets extra attack. Extra attack doubles your damage output, or for this character increases it by 40% because we are going from, by 80% because we're going from 3 attacks to 5 attacks per round. Since we can make 2 slashing flourishes with our main hand attacks now, and then an additional offhand attack, we have 5 attacks on our burst combo turns, so that's going to be a ridiculous amount of damage. That's 50 damage from Sharpshooter, 15 damage just from our dexterity alone, let alone the actual damage from our weapons or any other items that we're adding, so that's a huge amount of burst damage up front. For our spell selection at this level, we are going to take Plant Growth. Plant Growth, another non-concentration spell, and this is absolutely devastating to enemy melee characters because quartered movement speed makes it so hard for them to get to you, and you can just shoot them down with impunity using your crossbows as they are struggling to get out of the choking vines. I had to take a brief pause in the recording to let my cat into my office because he was scrabbling at the door really loudly, so now he's sitting on me. I anticipate that we're going to have to take another pause to let him back out when he inevitably decides he doesn't want to be in here. Anyways, at character level 7, now we've gotten pretty much everything that we want from Sword Bard, and we are free to multi-class into another class that's going to give us both a big boost to our damage and a big boost to our utility. Here I'm talking about Druid. Druid at first level already gives us a ton of extra utility for our character, and then at second level is going to boost our damage significantly, so a 2-level Druid dip is really good for a lot of damaging characters. For our cantrip selection here, we already get to increase our character's party utility significantly by grabbing Guidance and Resistance. This gives us a lot of stuff that we can add to our skill selection and also makes us better at passing saving throws that happen during dialogue. So this character is now really good in, even better in dialogue than it was already. And then for our prepared spells, we can potentially have swapped out Healing Word or Longstrider if we took those from our Bard levels. To prepare those, but the most important things to have prepared are those two, Enhance Sleep, and then you can add in like Create or Destroy Water or Fog Cloud for a no-save blinding effect. Since we have Healing Word and Longstrider from Bard levels, I'm just going to prepare Enhance Sleep and Fog Cloud here. The no-save blind that Fog Cloud provides is really useful for gaining advantage on your attacks and can be used to cause enemies to just take a lot of extra damage as you shoot them, make it easier to land your attacks, and also cripple them in melee combat. And then Enhanced Sleep gives your party a ton of mobility if you activate it before combat. This is a ritual spell, although it doesn't say so on the tooltip, so it's free to cast outside of combat. So if you cast it beforehand, then you can jump around much faster, including to high ground, which as an archer is great. You also get medium armor and shield proficiency, so if you've been having trouble with your armor class, then the Druid level fixes a lot of those issues as well. At level 7, or at level 8, we get our second level of Druid, and this is where the bonus damage comes in, because we're going to take Circle of Spores. Spore Druid gets the Symbiotic Entity class feature, which allows us to spend a wild shape charge to gain temp HP and do extra damage as long as we have that temp HP. It adds an extra 1d6 of damage to every single one of our attacks. We're making 5 attacks every round, and that's just going to keep increasing. So that's a huge amount of extra damage that we get from Symbiotic Entity. It also, the 8 temp HP aren't incredible, but they're not nothing either. This character can suffer from survivability issues, so increasing our HP by like a 1/7 roughly is a pretty big boost to our survivability. So Symbiotic Entity isn't bad there either. Wild shape forms also do have some utility. They give us a lot of escape options if a fight is starting to go bad, but really we're just here for the bonus damage. You can add in another prepared spell, the utility spells that I talked about, but the extra damage that we get, because we apply it so many times per turn, increases this character's damage output, especially its sustained damage output in longer fights, dramatically. Compared to a 2-level fighter dip, we get less upfront burst damage, and that's the usual build for Swordsbard archers, but more sustained damage over longer fights, so this character will just not run out of juice the way other Swordbard characters sometimes can. Here's a quick cat update for those on Cat Watch. He hasn't decided he wants to leave my office, but he has decided he wants to just sit over there licking the floor of my office, so if I seem a little distracted, it's because the world's biggest idiot is right next to me. Anyways, at character level 9, we've already got the bonus damage from Druid, so let's power up the character even further by multiclassing again. Of course, we're making offhand attacks, and there's a class that does that so much better than other classes, and that, of course, is going to be Rogue. This adds a d6 of sneak attack damage to our damage output every turn. Compared to the significant amount of damage that we're already doing, this isn't a big deal, but is a small additional bonus, and more damage is always good. This also gets us expertise into skills, so of course that's going to improve our ability to fulfill all of the utility that our party needs. That can be in something like Sleight of Hand and Stealth. You can put expertise in a dialogue skill like Intimidate. You also get to learn one more skill, so you can put that in Acrobatics to make you slightly harder to shove around. You can put it in whatever dialogue skill you didn't pick, like Performance. Expertise in Stealth and Sleight of Hand makes the character excellent. If you have a greater invisibility caster in your party, you can do the stealth archery thing. Sleight of Hand makes you basically incapable of failing to pick locks. So whatever utility you're doing for the party, having expertise in that just makes you even better at it. At character level 10, we take our second level of Rogue, which gets us some of the best utility combat actions in the game, in the form of Cunning Action, Hide, Dash, and Disengage. Being able to spend our bonus action on mobility in combat is incredibly useful, especially for an archery character that wants to stay out of melee, and especially in the very large arenas that make up a lot of the Act 3 combats. There's a lot of very large areas that you fight in, so having more mobility is very useful. Of course, Cunning Action Hide for bonus action stealth checks makes it much harder for enemies to retaliate against your attacks, because you can use all of your attacks, and then if an enemy somehow isn't dead, given all the burst damage that you lay into them, you can just hide, and then they can't do anything to you. So the rogue abilities are incredible. Of course, for any archer, these are awesome abilities that are really easy to underestimate just how much smoother this makes any character play out in practice, but when you actually use them, they're incredibly strong and very, very useful. Rogue level 3, at our next level, will increase our damage significantly yet again. We get to take our Rogue subclass, and of course, because we're making offhand attacks, the subclass that we're going to take is Thief Rogue. Thief Rogue gets an additional bonus action, which can be used just at sort of level 1 use, is just 1 extra attack every round, taking our number of attacks from 5 to 6, which already is a very high addition to our damage output and just overall utility. But an extra bonus action has so many more uses than that. We already saw several of them at level 2 Rogue with hides, dashes, and disengages for positioning or preventing counterattacks. You can drink potions, you can cast spells, and we'll talk about that in a second, and of course there's a million other uses besides, so not only does this increase our damage output, it also just makes the character incredibly better at everything, so Thief Rogue is amazing for any character that can use the offhand attack. And finally, at character level 12, we're going to take our 4th level of Rogue and get our feat, and that's just going to be used to bring our dexterity up to 20, so that we hit for more damage and more accurately. At this point in the game, of course, our hit chance should be pretty good, because we'll have used items and spells and effects that increase our hit chance, but obviously we want to increase that even more. So boosting our dexterity here is really good. Now remember, this 18 dexterity is a little deceptive. It looks like we've had 16 all game and then 18 all game, but we'll be using the Graceful Cloth to bring our dex up to 20, and then 18 for the end game, but we'll be using the Graceful Cloth for +2 dexterity, so our dexterity will have been 18 for most of the game, just like any other character, and then 20 at this level, so we aren't losing out on dexterity because of the itemization choices that we're using. Alright, that is the build. This build is incredibly high damage, incredibly fun utility, and has a ton of broken item combos, so let's talk about those item combos and see just how much more powerful they can make the character. 4 items for this character. One of the great things about this character is we get access to many of the most powerful, most sort of build around and broken item combinations in the game. So firstly, of course, we're going to want a pair of hand crossbows. That's what the whole build is based around. Typically, you're going to want to use the Hellfire hand crossbow, which is the best in the game, and the Nair Misser. The Nair Misser does force damage, which is nice because fewer enemies resist it. If you have a reason specifically to do piercing damage, like the Ballast Armor, then you can just use any generic hand crossbow with an enhancement bonus in order to do piercing damage instead of force damage. This character also uses special arrows very well. We're making a lot of arrow attacks, so you want to collect a bunch of those, as well as special coatings. When you apply a coating to your weapons, it applies to both your main hand and offhand weapon, so you can make enemies do a lot of poison or extra damage or whatever if you use those. For our chest slot, of course, in this version of the build, we're using the Graceful Cloth in order to hit 20 dexterity, so we're just going to have that, which is great. This does make your AC a little bit low, but this character is going to be operating at range and doing so much damage up front that having low AC mostly doesn't matter. If you use Ethel's Hair to hit 20 dex, you can do a more defensive version of the character with something like the Armor of Agility, and then you can have quite respectable armor class. If you combine that with a shield and other armor class increasing items, then the character can be much easier to pilot, so you may want to go for that more defensive item setup if you are less familiar with positioning in Honor Mode. For damage output, of course, we also want to boost our damage per shot as much as we possibly can. Items like the Gloves of Archery in the early game, and then any item that gives us extra damage dice, will be critically hitting a lot, so items like the Flawed Helldust Gloves that add extra dice to our rolls with our shots will increase our damage output enormously. Speaking of critical hits, items like the Knife of the Undermountain King, that are melee weapons with passive effects, like improving our critical hit chance, can work for this character. Just like shields, we can benefit from the armor class or passive effects of weapons if we have the Knife of the Undermountain King equipped in our melee slot. While we have our ranged weapons out, we will still benefit from the bonus critical hit chance of the knife. So this and like the Bloodthirst Dagger, for example, can be really great items to improve our damage output with our weapons. We also get a bunch of awesome combinations. The Helm of Arcane Acuity gives us Arcane Acuity, which increases our spell save DCs and spell attack rolls every time we hit with a weapon. We're hitting with a weapon 1,000,000 times per turn, so we can max out our Arcane Acuity stacks instantly, and then we can use the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel to be able to cast illusion or enchantment spells as a bonus action. This lets us use some of the most powerful spells in the game, like Hypnotic Pattern and Hold Person, as a bonus action with spell save DCs that are so high that enemies cannot possibly succeed on them, even with only 16 charisma. That's plenty for this combo to work, because Arcane Acuity is so busted. So this gives the character incredible lockdown in addition to our incredible damage. Any item that gives us a bonus to our hit chance as well, like the Marksmanship Hat, which we'll be using earlier on in the game, is very useful. Because of course, this character's main struggle is landing all of its very powerful and very numerous attacks, so any item that gives you a bonus to your hit chance is going to be really good for this character also. We can also add even more lockdown with some other cool combinations. The Callous Glow Ring not only increases our damage by adding 2 damage to every shot, this damage is radiant damage, even though it's not listed here, which allows us to use Radiating Orbs on this character. With 5 attacks per turn, or 6 attacks per turn in the late game, we can max out radiating orb stacks on bosses. So even in longer fights, enemies will just not be able to fight back because we're going to get 10 radiating orb stacks on them. If we have, for example, the luminous gloves and the callous glow ring, shoot an enemy 5 times, that's 10 radiating orb stacks. That's a -10 to their chance to hit, because radiating orb gives them -1 per stack remaining, and so they'll never be able to hit you back. Combine that with the Boots of Stormy Clamor, that gives reverberation whenever we inflict a condition, and now enemies are prone, radiating orbed, and totally helpless against this character. Other items that increase our damage in these slots are also good. The Strange Conduit Ring will almost always be concentrating on a spell, so you can use that to increase your damage output per shot. Or, for more control-oriented character, the Snowburst Ring, combined with the Drakethroat Glaive, can be really cool also. The Drakethroat Glaive can be used to enchant one of our weapons with a +1 enchantment and 1d4 cold damage, which not only increases our damage output significantly and makes it easier for us to hit, it also will mean that we're dealing cold damage, and that can create an ice surface with the Snowburst Ring, where enemies will then fall over. So we have a lot of different options for super powerful control combos with this character, whether that be bonus action casts with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, whether that be control effects from Radiating Orb, or whether that be ice surfaces from the Snowburst Ring. This character has tons of lockdown in addition to its awesome damage, and gets to use some of the most powerful item combinations in the game. It's also worth noting that this character is one of the best in the game at using Illithid Powers. Although we have the wrong casting stat, because of the order in which we leveled up, for the powers that force a saving throw. One of the key requirements for being great at using Illithid Powers is just making a lot of attacks, which this character does. We can benefit from every Illithid power that just requires us to be making lots of attacks, and there's lots of them, and they're also especially synergistic with this character. Firstly, Favorable Beginnings, just increases our chance to hit with our attacks, and remember that's one of the things that this character needs, is increased chances to hit, so Favorable Beginnings is great for this character as well. It also synergizes with Slashing Flourish, because when you're making 2 attacks as a single attack, the Favorable Beginnings applies to both of them, so you get to sort of double up on Favorable Beginnings value. You can also use Luck of the Far Realms for automatic critical hits, and that's great for this character's damage output. Ability Drain is really nice for us also, because we're attacking with ranged attacks, which use dexterity. Reducing enemy dexterity reduces their armor class, making subsequent attacks easier to hit. Psionic Overload gives us an additional d4 psychic damage on every shot, which of course is awesome, because we just get to do that over and over and over again. Pull the Weak lets us explode a bunch of enemies. Favorable Beginnings also applies to our dialogue checks, which of course we're doing a lot of. So there's a lot that this Illithid powers that this character can use that are extremely useful for us, making it one of the better Illithid power users in the entire game. Alright my friends, I hope that you've enjoyed this look at this extremely powerful and versatile character that can fill pretty much any role in an honor mode party with incredible damage, control, and utility. And I hope that it helps you if you are planning your honor mode runs. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like. It helps me out a ton with the algorithm, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. And I do read every single comment. I really enjoy all of your comments. I answer them somewhat sporadically and randomly because I get a lot of comments, so I'd just be answering comments all day if I still tried to answer every single comment, but I do read them all, and I really appreciate seeing your thoughts. So definitely let me know, as always, if you have ideas, what you think of the build, or anything along those lines. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 builds, especially with the patch upcoming soon, hopefully, and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, my friends. I'll catch you next time.